Welcome all, and thank you for joining us. My name is Denise Jorgens, and I'm the Director of International House here at the University of Chicago. We are so pleased to be hosting this annual public lecture and to provide support to this program through our Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series. International House has partnered with the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture since it was established. And actually, before it was established, Kathy Cohen and I were just talking about this. A bit of background on International House. This past academic year, International House of Chicago celebrated an important milestone, our 90th anniversary. International House of Chicago was founded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1932. From the day International House of Chicago opened its doors, our mission has been to promote cross-cultural understanding, mutual respect, and friendship among students and scholars, and on the part of the people of metropolitan Chicago, and the broader communities that we serve toward individuals of all nations and backgrounds. Through the International House Student Life Experience, and through our internationally focused public programs, such as tonight's event, International House is dedicated to transforming people's lives for a better world. This mission is further extended through the work of the International Houses Worldwide Organization, which is currently a network of 16 international houses on 4 continents. We invite you to join us during the remainder of the academic year for many of our other Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series programs. Information about all of our programs is on our website and on the literature table in the entryway. On behalf of the Global International House community, I want to welcome you again and thank you for joining us. Enjoy the program.
Good evening. My name is Dr. KJ Hickerson, and I'm honored to be with all of you as a representative for Faculty for Justice in Palestine. Thank you to CSRPC for offering FJP the opportunity to briefly speak at this esteemed event. FJP is a coalition of faculty and staff dedicated to the liberation of the Palestinian people, as well as for broader intersecting matters of justice. Our UChicago chapter has over 130 members, many of whom are here tonight. And if you would like to learn more about Palestine and our organization, please feel free to speak to us after tonight's talk. We've also got a table there in the back. Tonight, I want to draw your attention to an ongoing catastrophe. First, in Gaza, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian territories states that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicated Israel's conditions of genocide are met. And as we sit here tonight, Israel's war against Gazans is expanding. The death toll itself is higher than any other major 21st century conflict. And a conservative estimate is 35,000 people. Most estimates put this at thousands more. The number of children killed in this conflict is higher than all other conflicts in the past 4 years combined. Many more are injured. Famine is a reality. The World Food Program states that well over 1 million Gazans are experiencing catastrophic hunger, the highest space within their ratings. Gazan infrastructure is in rubble, and there's a concerted effort to destroy Gazan cultural life. Libraries have been destroyed. The central archives of Gaza City, the repository of Gazan history dating back to the Ottoman era, has been destroyed. There's large-scale scholasticide, the term used to refer to the systematic obliteration of education. All Gazan universities have been destroyed. Students, academics, and university presidents have been targeted, and now an entire population does not have access to an education. This is nothing short of both a full-scale attack on Gazans' historic past and lived present, but also an assault on the range of possibilities for Gazan futures. In the wake of these ongoing catastrophes, for months our students have attempted to engage with the university administration about our university's research, academic, and financial complicity in this conflict, to no avail. Drawing from the long tradition of protest at the University of Chicago, from the civil rights movement to the anti-apartheid struggle, on April 29, they began an encampment on the Quad, stating in their email to President Alivisatos that they will not stand by and attempt to persuade the university to stop funding genocide. And they called on the university to disclose, divest, and repair. Disclose their investments, divest from weapons manufacturers and fossil fuel companies, and provide reparations to Palestine and the South Side. The community they formed in protest on the Quad highlighted joy and possibilities. Student Justice for Palestine and the larger U-Chicago United for Palestine made an education center in the Quad, U-Chicago's popular university for Gaza, held music programs and classes, and created art and a library in a space representing a space and the possibilities here that's been destroyed in Gaza itself. For over a week, FJP members served as safety and dean liaisons and wrote op-eds, called alumni, met with the media in an attempt to keep our students safe from the university's threat of violence and to allow them the opportunity to exercise their right to freedom of expression and protest. But yesterday morning at 4:45, while almost all protesters were asleep in their tents, UCPD police raided and razed the Quad encampment, terrifying students, all on the orders of President Alivisatos. Following yesterday's violent raid on peaceful student protesters, we are heartbroken. We are filled with sadness, exhaustion, anger, and concern. We are processing yesterday's raid and practicing care. We know from the lineages of many of you long involved in the struggle to build a more just and equitable world that rest is not inaction, and that reflection on the past can be a part of a process to imagine better futures. And so it is with much joy and humility that we are here with you tonight to hear Professor Gina Dent's talk on visualizing abolition and her conversation with Professor Kathy Cohen following. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gina Miranda Samuels, and I'm the faculty director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and a professor of social work at the Crown School. On behalf of CSRPC, I wish to welcome you to this year's annual public lecture featuring our distinguished and beloved guest, Dr. Gina Dent, in conversation with also our distinguished and beloved colleague, Kathy Cohen, Imagining a World Without Prisons. I want to first express my thanks to CSRPC staff and special thanks to Tracy Matthews, CSRPC's fearless executive director. It has been an honor to work, lead, and learn with this amazing group of women. And to Brianna Soslovic, who organized the series of lead-up events in preparation for tonight. I hope many of you attended those. And thank you to iHouse for allowing us this space. Tonight is a team effort, one that I am thrilled to be a part of this evening. The mission of CSRPC is to serve the university and broader community as a hub of research and incubator of anti-racist practice. We advance scholarship, arts, and public dialogue about the centrality of race and racism in the systems we inhabit, and I do mean to include University of Chicago in that. We believe in the possibilities of a just campus, city, and world, people working across disciplines, intersecting identities, geographies, and ways of knowing, relationships where everyone is both teacher and student, spaces of growth, compassion, respect, freedom, and joy. For the past 5 years, and under previous director Riley Snorton, we engaged in a 2-year-long freedom dreaming process from which the above mission and vision emerged. As we continue on our own internal process of learning to practice and embody this mission and vision, we have launched a multi-year Reimagining the University Race and Freedom project. Through this initiative, we have funded numerous students, staff, and faculty projects to dream with us. This year, we opened it up to reimagining work to community members. Some of you may have attended various reimagining events, including our conference last fall, co-hosted by our friends at the Logan Center for Arts. Tonight is a very special expression of CSRPC's pride in formalizing our long-standing partnership with Alice Kim. Yes. For the few of you in this room who do not know her, Alice Kim is a force. She's a Taurus. Sorry, Alice. An abolitionist, and in my opinion, is one of those rare people who actually walks the talk. Alice writes and teaches and organizes around access to education and liberation for people who are incarcerated, experience police torture, and those who face capital punishment. She is the co-founder of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, the group that initiated historic reparations legislation passed by the Chicago City Council in May 2015 for survivors tortured by Chicago Police Commander John Burge's torture ring. She has a list of other amazing accomplishments, too many for me to read, but equally impressive. 2 years ago, we were able to support the transition of Alice's work at the Posen Human Rights Center to CSRPC. Alice is now CSRPC's Director of Practice and leads the next phase of that work under the newly named Beyond Prisons project. This year's annual public lecture lifts up CSRPC's unequivocal commitment to abolitionist work and principles as foundational to our reimagining praxis. I hope that tonight's lecture and dialogue inspire you to join us in our mission and our vision, and that you leave here with a renewed sense of hope, possibility, and passion for liberatory work, and that work that is so urgently needed for such change here on our campus. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Hi, everyone. We walk into the future by visualizing it today. These are the words of Devon Terrell, a poet who is incarcerated in an Illinois prison, who wrote these words in 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Devon's words have stayed with me, and they are particularly fitting for us to lift up this evening. In this moment in time, we're witnessing human rights crises around the globe, from the disinvestment in our communities and neighborhoods right here in Chicago to the streets of Gaza. In collaboration with the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, affectionately known as PNAP, PNAP's in the house, shout out to PNAP. The Beyond Prisons initiative has been working with incarcerated scholars, artists, and civic leaders like Devon Terrell at Stateville Prison, a maximum security prison about 30 miles outside of Chicago.
There is a 30-foot wall that surrounds that prison. That wall not only physically separates those incarcerated behind that wall from the rest of us, it effectively disappears those who are caged within the prison from our communities and our everyday lives. The dominant narrative about prisons and the people caged within our prisons is that they are unworthy, undeserving, and too dangerous to live among the rest of us. But every week, when we go inside, we are reminded from our incarcerated colleagues of their brilliance and will not only to survive, but to thrive. In this moment in time, as we see injustice all around us, we also see the beautiful struggle of people resisting state repression and violence on our campus, in our prisons, and on our streets. As we continue to do the work to build the world we want to live in, it is especially meaningful to come together tonight to hear from Dr. Gina Dent on visualizing abolition, how to imagine a world without prisons. We have a very special program planned for this evening. Our fierce and beloved colleague, Kathy Cohen, a professor here at the university and chair of the recently formed Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, will be in conversation with Professor Dent following Professor Dent's lecture. Professor Cohen is the author of 2 books, The Boundaries of Blackness, AIDS and the Breakdown of Black Politics and Democracy Remixed, Black Youth and the Future of American Politics. She also created and oversees 2 incredible projects, Gen Forward and the Black Youth Project. I've also had the pleasure of co-teaching UChicago's first mixed enrollment class at Stateville with Prof. Cohen. This class brings UChicago students into Stateville to learn alongside incarcerated students enrolled in Northeastern Illinois University's University Without Walls program, another partnership with PNAP, and it has truly been a transformational experience for all of us. And now it is my privilege to introduce Professor Gina Dent, who is Professor of Feminist Studies, History of Consciousness, and Legal Studies at the University of Santa Cruz, where she is also the Humanities Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Professor Dent is the editor of Black Popular Culture and serves as the principal investigator of Visualizing Abolition. Gina has been building community with our social justice and feminist abolitionist communities here in Chicago for many years. Her work has been so critical to many of us doing the work around prisons, pushing us to think more deeply and critically and expansively about the prison as an institution, the perception of the prison, and the ways in which we can conduct creative research to shift our society's social attachment to prisons. Yesterday, Professor Dent took part in a powerful exchange with the PNAP think tank at Stateville about an exhibition created by the think tank. We discussed the emancipatory possibilities of art and education and how the making of art and the creation of knowledge, when done collectively, can be a liberatory praxis. In the words of think tank colleague Daryl Fair, the work starts now. Let us deconstruct systems of injustice and dream together for a better, brighter future. I was moved during this conversation not only by Professor Dent's critical scholarship and engaged practice, but how she does the work with care, intentionality, and paying close attention to those with lived experience of the carceral system. I have seen over the years how Professor Dent makes and takes the time to build community and lift up the knowledge, creativity, and voices of people most impacted by the system. So please join me in welcoming Professor Gina Dent.
I want to thank you all for being here, because there's a few places in town you might also be doing things that would be useful. but I feel especially welcomed in Chicago. This is a room filled with people I know, people I admire, and so it's even harder, I want you to understand, to speak in front of the people who you know and admire, just putting that out there. I'm going to try to be brief, because I do want to get to the conversation. It is my favorite part of everything. But I didn't want to start without sharing some images with you. So I want to thank International House and Denise for having us. I want to thank Tracy Matthews, Chair Kilpatrick, and of course, Gina, where you are, there you are, other Gina Samuels, for inviting me and for being so kind and gracious with everything, and for making this not only time for a lecture, which we're all going to experience, but also a week rich with other activity. That's really filling my heart. It's been incredible being here already. I also, I was very moved, and I almost felt like staying in my seat, listening to Alice Kim, whom I admire so much and learn from so much. And I am really looking forward to talking to my esteemed and dear friend, Kathy Cohen. And I have many other comrades and friends in this room, but I would be remiss if I didn't point to my co-authors, Beth Ritchie and Erica Miners, who are sitting here. Working with them has been a tremendous experience, and it has really deepened, I think, the relationships we already had, so I'm really happy to see you. I also want to say that after being at the Humans of Life Row exhibition yesterday, I can't really tell you all, well, first of all, you have to all go. You have to experience it for yourself. I know, because I am a curator of exhibitions and I know how much work it takes, but the kinds of exhibitions that we're going to be talking about tonight are not the usual ones. And the relationships that are at the foundation of that work and the way in which they were expressed in the exhibition are truly powerful. So I would invite you all to go, and I was really pleased to be able to talk to some of the artists yesterday in the think tank, and I look forward to returning when I can and to hearing more about the work. And finally, I want to thank Professor Hickerson for speaking to the issue, to where our hearts are now, and to describing what is going on here. And I want to thank those of you who are in the encampment who invited me to come. It was my intention, actually, to come to the encampment on my first day, and I woke up and found that it had already been raided. So I want to thank you all for the invitation, and I want you to know that I will bring your strength and your words back with me to California when I first see our own encampment, which I haven't been to because I've been out of town. So it's incredible to hear what's going on and to see the exchanges, and as difficult as it is to not be able to do as much as we all would like to stop the incredible violence, it is really uplifting still to be a part of such a beautiful community together. And of course, I could really talk about that for the remainder of my time, but hopefully you will find what I'm presenting to you not to be self-indulgent, but in fact to be an extension of those comments. So, I want you to start where I started with the project that's called Visualizing Abolition. And I have been working at Prison Abolition as an organizer and an activist for a very long time, but I only started to do scholarship somewhat later. And one of the things that I was motivated by was the extent to which not only people who didn't know anything about incarceration and hadn't been inside themselves, what they thought about prisons, but the ways that even organizers had a certain kind of understanding about prisons and the law that we were carrying. Now, of course, we've evolved quite a bit since those early days in the late 1990s when I was thinking about these questions, but one of the things I was focused on was the extent to which our ways of understanding the criminal legal system extended from consuming, either actively or passively, visual media. And so this is one of Thomas Edison's first films. It's called The Execution of Stroglos, with panorama of Auburn Prison. I don't have time for the mini lectures on all of those things. There's a lot to say about all of that. I will tell you that Stroglos was an anarchist who attempted to assassinate President McKinley, and that after he was caught, he was indeed executed. And this film, which is one of the first moving image films we have, is a reenactment of that execution. But it begins, as you may have seen, and I'll show you in a moment again, with a scene of a train. And so the train is the first thing you see, and after that you see the prison revealed behind it. It is a signal that not only is the technology itself a modern miracle, but the train itself is also a sign of our development and our modernization. And of course, the prison revealed behind it is also supposed to represent that. So I want us to think about how those are wedded together. I'm going to move now to some stills from this very short film. If you're interested in seeing it, it's very easily available now, as almost everything is. And so you can Google it in the Library of Congress and find it. But I want to show you just a couple of short images. So you can see there the train. It's a little hard to make out. And you can see the prison becoming revealed there. And then I chose this image where the actor is simulating struggling while being executed. And of course, the doctors are leaning in and are an important part. So the prison warden and the doctor are represented here. And both are leaning into incarceration, leaning into carcerality, leaning into carcerality and the scientific revolution that it represented to them. This leads to more conversation about medicalization, more conversation about where we are today. But I wanted to set this up by telling you that this is my background. I started to study long time ago. I'm old now. Long time ago. And one of the things I was doing at the time was looking at, you could finally Google the TV guide, what you could watch that represented prisons what time of the day. And every hour of every day, you could find something that represented prison. It might be a cartoon, it might be the news, it might be a film, it might be television, but the point is we're inundated by it. So I really began to think about how we would address that and what we could do about it. So fast forward about 25 years, and my collaborator, Rachel Nelson, at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who is the chief curator and director of the Institute of the Arts and Sciences, approached me in 2017 and asked me if I would be a consultant and advisor on an exhibition that she was planning. And I was reluctant because I had tried to work on issues like this before, and arts efforts were often trivialized, or they were treated as representative of what we already know from other more important disciplines and more important ways of understanding. And so I wasn't sure that it was something that I felt I could do or that our institution could support. So I gave you some links there, but the easiest way to do it is to Google Visualizing Abolition if you're interested in our project, because now, some 7 years later, we have a very full program that includes visual arts exhibitions. It has a musical component curated by Terry Lynn Carrington with original music compositions and videos. We have an undergraduate curriculum called VAST. We want it to be called VAST because it's Visualizing Abolition Studies, which sounds kind of silly, but VAST is great. So we are the VAST program. We also have internships, artist residencies, dissertation workshops, postdoctoral fellowships, and I'm forgetting a lot of other elements, some of which you're going to hear about in a moment. And it's grown to be such a big and important project in my life, and it's made me feel useful in times that sometimes make us feel that we have nothing positive to contribute. So we began with 2 exhibitions once we opened our own space. We had been using the San Jose Museum of Art. They're one of our partners. We'd use the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz. We'd use the Davenport Jail, which is no longer a jail, but operates as a tourist museum, and some of you will be familiar with this. And it had never operated as an abolitionist space to really think critically about incarceration. So we were doing those things. But when we opened our own space in 2023, the beginning of that year, we started with 2 exhibitions, the first of which is by Ashley Hunt. And I just wanted to give you a couple of selections from the exhibition to stress the way we were relating to the project. One thing about this project is that it's deeply collaborative, and we're working all the time with lots of collectives, lots of organizers, and though you won't see that in every image, I want you to understand that. So Ashley Hunt, who has been a member of Critical Resistance, an organization that I think a lot of you in here probably know about, has worked with several other organizations, including Song, which I think probably a lot of you know about, and other incredible organizations. But he's also been working on this project called Degrees of Visibility for decades now. And one thing he does is he takes landscape photos of prison sites, and then he narrates at the bottom details that would never be made apparent by that system. Sometimes it's how many people are inside, sometimes it's a story he has about his encounter there, sometimes it's someone inside told him. But he does this also to speak to something that's very important for us with the project, which is that figures, the human figure, is not the only way to tell the story. And that bars are not the only elements of a language of incarceration. That we have to learn to see the ways in which we are inoculated to the presence of carcerality all around us and how it is naturalized. And so he takes the field of landscape photography, which has a connection to settler colonization, which is not the way it's normally taught in art history, and he reveals that history in his work. And I chose, of the many images, I also chose this one of the Marin County Jail because I grew up there. Not in the jail, but in Marin County. And this one, which I selected just because I think it's an incredible image, is of the Montana State Prison, Deer Lodge. So I'm going to be going through now pretty quickly because I really am excited for the conversation. So I will ask you to indulge me as I flip through things that might go very quickly. But I did want you to start to see something which is important to us that has to do with the capacity of visual arts institutions to respond to the times. I mean, one thing, if anyone in here has ever been involved in a show, what you will know is that they're planned years in advance. And so this exhibition, which is one of our earliest at the space, is an exhibition by the Forensic Architecture Investigation Unit at Al-Haq. And I'll explain to you what that means. So forensic architecture, first, I'll explain. How many of you have ever heard of that artist collective? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So I.L. Weitzman, Israeli, now residing in the UK, began something called forensic architecture many years ago now. And at the heart of that project was the desire to think and use the technologies that the state uses, because one of the things he discovered was that the state was using our theories and technologies. One of the first things he talked about was that soldiers in the Israeli army were using postmodern theory and studying works that a lot of us thought belonged to the theoretical left. So one of the results of that is that he started to use technologies like geolocation and other kinds of AI and other kinds of things that we think of as belonging to the state and its surveillance apparatus to produce art that counters state narratives. But not just to show in museums and galleries, but to provide evidence for use in courtrooms and in other kinds of spaces where justice claims are being made. And so, but they had never had a unit of forensic architecture in Palestine itself. And so in 2020, I think it was, sorry, the Al-Haq Forensic Architecture Investigation Unit was begun in Ramallah, Palestine. And we at the Little University of California, Santa Cruz became the location for their first ever exhibition. Now, of course, this exhibition was planned starting in 2022. And yet, October 7th, 2023 comes, and we have to think about the fact that we're supposed to open it that November. Now, of course, our artists can't work. They are both busy providing material evidence to the UN and to other spaces, because Al-Haq is a Palestinian human rights organization that was started as the first ever one of its kind in 1979. And that organization has provided that kind of material for many, many years. But they never had combined with architects and artists to introduce another component, another way of understanding how to present evidence. And so Rachel and I were faced with the decision of what were we going to do. And we decided, well, we'll just open the space, and if all we have are walls, they can choose a color, we'll paint them, and we'll put up a statement, and we're a university, we'll just teach. But as it turned out, it was very important for these artists to continue to work with us on the project, and they did everything they could to make it work. So we opened the exhibition, and it was true that in the beginning, we opened the exhibition with some blank screens. And so what I'm going to show you now are a series of images from the exhibition taken over the time of its run, and they show you how we filled up the space. And what was so beautiful was that people came just to sit with the blank screen. People came just to be in the space. People used it as a space of meditation, a space of education. We had classes coming through, and it remained a peaceful space, but a space that was also enabling people to deepen their radical commitments, to understand further what they were dealing with, but also to touch in with their hearts and to think about and contemplate what they were next going to be doing. So as you can see, the exhibition started to evolve. Eventually, we had work, and eventually, we had 3 artists from Palestine who were able to get visas, get across the border, and come to us for a couple of weeks, which was a thrilling thing to be able to do in these times. And as they joined us, they continued to put work on the walls. So you can see it's starting to get filled out. So I want to tell you a little bit about the work they did, because they, as Palestinians, had complicated feelings about what they were doing for forensic architecture, especially at this time. And they wanted the work to have the touch of a hand evident. So they used a lot of the technologies that forensic architecture uses, but they also added small touches when they were physically present. So they put those pieces of yarn on the wall and moved things around in the space and wanted us to feel their humanity without having to see a photograph of Palestinian people or a statement that Palestinian people and Gazans in particular are human. They took that for granted. And they taught us through this visual material some of the techniques that the Israeli army uses. One of these techniques is called the pressure cooker. It has to do with seizing a neighborhood from the outside and pushing the residents in so much that they are pressurized through that. They also mapped the Jenin refugee camp and talked about attacks in Jenin. And they presented a film on the extrajudicial killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. And I think that is really important because their titles are always very careful. Extrajudicial is an important category for them because they want us to understand how we are constantly moving in and out of legal terrain and what is allowed and sanctioned even when it is not legal internationally, and what we are prevented from doing, like being in encampments on a campus. And finally, I'll share a piece that we commissioned from them, along with the rest of the materials mostly, called Platform for Gaza. And I'm going to show you a bit of how it works. It's an interactive platform where they were, and they did this the whole time they were with us in Santa Cruz, they were mapping attacks as they were happening in Gaza. So this is a 2024 work, but it is unfortunately an ongoing work. And so we decided at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences and with the Visualizing Abolition Project that we would not be able to take down this exhibition and get rid of everything and move on to the next subject. So we made some decisions and we ended up bringing the Platform for Gaza with us into our next big show. That show is the culmination of years of work. It's called Seeing Through Stone, and it is a multi-sided exhibition at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences, at the San Jose Museum of Art, and at an organization in Santa Cruz called Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos. And now I want to lift up the names of my collaborators there. The chief curator at the San Jose Museum of Art is Lauren Shell Dickens. Lauren has partnered with us for Visualizing Abolition shows from our beginning. And this show includes over 85 artists and collectives, which means we are working with hundreds of people. And it has been an exceptional process, not only because of getting to work with so many amazing people, but also because we are working with Barrios Unidos, which is an organization begun by a man named Daniel, but he goes by Nane Alejandres. And Nane himself was incarcerated when he got out. He ended up going to UC Santa Cruz and did his degree. And when he got out of school, he opened Barrios, and it's been open for over 40 years. And they receive people when they exit prison, they do cultural work, they build space, and they have been exceptional partners with us. We've come to rely on them, and we work with them, and this will be the first time that we've held an exhibition with them. So this is the title wall at San Jose Museum of Art. For those of you who know the work of Jackie Summel, that's Jackie Summel's apothecart sitting in front. I wanted to share this image. I won't be able to share many. I told you 80-something, whatever, artists and collectives, so I'm not going to show you very much of the work. But I wanted to give you a sample, and I'm beginning with this Gabriela Mura piece because this piece, though it's very quiet here, and I appreciate that, actually moves and makes sounds. It is a machine that is boring a hole into that rock. And you hear it as soon as you enter the space, and you're both aware of the work it will take to end prisons, but also of the fact that the little efforts that we make intentionally make a difference in the end. Here's an installation view, and I wanted to share this because a dear friend and artist from your way, Maria Gaspar, has work that is along the backside there, those beautiful paintings, and also the casts of bars and bricks that she salvaged from the Cook County Jail as they were taking apart part of the jail. She does not display the bars and bricks in untransformed fashion. She only shows them in the gallery space in glass because they are breakable. But we did have 2 musical performances so far where artists and musicians played those bars. So we've also transformed the bars sonically, and that's been a beautiful part of our programming. I'm just going to flip through. These are just some installation shots this is from the Institute of the Arts and Sciences. That's like a skin technique on the wall. That's actually an image taken from a closed prison, and it's made by actually adhering something to the wall and pulling a part of the wall's surface away. And then this is an installation image at Barrios Unidos, but I wanted to share this because I'm introducing Caleb Duarte's work with Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos, Tres Terrenos. And we have these towers. If you can see that tower there that's covered in mud, we have 3 of the towers, one in each space. And over the course of the exhibition, so here's the tower at San Jose. The exhibition will end January 5th. Those towers will be covered by works of those at Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos who are engaged in making art there and doing workshops. So this tower, the one we have at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences, as you can see, is already on its side. It's already having to lie down because we have done so much. We have been really intentional in talking to each other a lot about what we want to introduce into the dialogue around prisons and where we veer from the conventional way of speaking about these things, what we feel we're missing, what we feel like we need to bring to the conversation. And so I'm just giving you a taste of this here. This is a Colombian artist who now resides in the United States named Carlos Mota. It's called the Capuchin Order, and when you actually see it, it's a small sculpture that sits on a table, and it has a slide deck, and the slides are being projected onto the sculpture. But of course, the sculpture represents the missionary colonial order, and instead of allowing that sculpture to appear untransformed, he has projected images of the people from that area, indigenous people primarily, onto the sculpture. We've also been very mindful of the way in which information travels, especially with abolition work. I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world, and many people often say, we need you to come here and bring the idea of abolition, which seems very counter-abolitionist. So we did some work to try and reverse the vector of transmission and translation. And so we transformed, or I should say the collective Explode platform, which includes Claudio Bueno, my colleague at UC Santa Cruz, and João Simões. And this is called Passagem, which just means basically hallway or passageway. And so we took an ordinary passageway at our space and painted it red and allowed them to take the space over. And on the opening night, we also had music and ritual in line with Brazilian culture, beautiful music. We also took, you can see the red, hopefully, line. That's our row of books that you'll see when you enter. We always are wanting to show people more and more of the books surrounding abolition. But we, on the red shelf, we then moved some of our other books in English, and we replaced them with books only in Portuguese. And so these are the books that will remain until January 5th at least. And we did some work in talking about what we were selecting, and we were, on the opening, some of us read out loud from some of these texts together, which was really beautiful. We work with a number of different groups in Brazil, and this is another one that I thought was really important to talk about, especially since I was talking about forensic architecture. Frente 3 de Fevereiro uses AI to create their work. And they created this work in the wake of a police killing of Flavio Santa Anna, who was a black dentist who was killed by the Sao Paulo military police in 2004. But the AI that they use is actually to bring back their mother. And she speaks through AI about the current conditions of racism and carcerality in Brazil. And what you can maybe see here, there's a video room, and so these are 3 walls here. They did a beautiful a video installation here. And they do actions in various places, and so you can see it says, "Onde estão os negros?" So where are all the black people? So they ended up somewhere in, Brazil is what it is. We also have work by a couple of artists from India. This is Shilpa Gupta. You can see that it looks like a flag on the wall. It's called Untitled, There Is No Border Here. And some of you know, because I know that you've been studying some things, that one of my concerns over a long period of time is thinking about the prison as a border. And if you look carefully, however, at a detail, you will see that she's used something that resembles caution tape, and printed on there is no border here, over and over and over again. And since I was in Chicago, I didn't want to neglect to represent Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, and this is Joey Mogul working with them, and also the Tea Project of Amber Ginsberg and Aaron Hughes. They are ink on silk, and they are 2 declarations, and they are called Speculative Reparations Ordinance for Chicago Burge Police Torture Survivors. That piece was done in 2012. And the second one on the right is called Speculative Reparations Ordinance for Guantanamo Torture Survivors 2022. We have the whimsical work of Jackie Summel and Maura Murdoch, but it's called Color the Skies, Fall in Prisons. If you walk past the wall, you won't see this right away. It's a tiny little keyhole. And of course, we often walk past our opportunities to work toward abolition. But if you stop and you pause and you look carefully and you take time, you will look through there and you will see the sky. That has been one of our themes of the exhibition, and we sent a prompt to several people we knew, or organizations we knew, and people inside. And the prompt was really about what it would be in a world without prisons. Everyone would see the sky, is what the piece is called, and it's a collective piece. Every site of our exhibition has a wall of skies. And those walls of skies come to us from various parts of the world, and all of those artists are participating in our exhibition. I'll just show you a few. This is the wall at Barrios Unidos. This is the wall at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences to your right. And this is a detail of the wall at the Institute of the Arts and Sciences. 4 girls who work with the Sisters Inside program in Brisbane, Australia, painted these skies for us. And these young girls are learning now not to believe what they're told about themselves, their culture, and the people in our lives that are inside. So I want to close with this return to where we are now, the image of the platform for Gaza again, which remains, but we paired it now with a 34-minute, I think, video from the Freedom Theater, which we commissioned at the very last minute because we had an incredible event with them in February. And it was a live performance event. And they then made a video for us called Your Time Is Not Your Time, in which they, as actors and artists, reflect on what it's like to be living under the bombardment. They are artists who live in and work around the Jenin refugee camp and are engaged in trying to manage temporality every day, because they are being asked to live in the time of occupation, and they are seeking to live in the time of freedom. Thank you.
Okay. How's everyone doing? Yeah, that was amazing.
I'm sorry, I had a lot of slides.
Yes, yes. All right, we're going to have a quick conversation, I think, but we'll see how long it lasts. And I want to start actually with Palestine, but I want to start with the encampment here at the University of Chicago. As Professor Hickerson reminded us, at the University of Chicago, Students for Justice in Palestine, comrades, allies, built an incredible encampment. And I think quite often we've been defending that encampment as we're at the free speech university. This was an example of free speech. But I think anyone who spent time there also understood the beauty of that encampment, of the community that was produced. For example, if you walked in, there was food. No one said, "Are you a member of the encampment? You get food." Everyone said, "Do you want food?" There was a library. There was debate. There were workshops, right? There was a kind of organic and beautiful learning going on. The things that supposedly we say at a university, we want to foster in our students, right? And so I guess I want to remember really the kind of amazing community that I think represents the best of the University of Chicago, that these young activists, organizers, students devoted and built for us as a reminder of what is the work that we're supposed to be doing here at this university. And then, on the morning of May 7th, as you mentioned, the free speech president, in the dark of night, sent in the UCPD, which is the University of Chicago Police Department, the third largest police department in the state of Illinois, with, as I understand it, no warning, and they raided and razed that beautiful encampment. So I know that you work and have, you've spent some time thinking about Palestine. You've been there, that you are deeply devoted, and you're also an abolitionist. I'm wondering if you could just take some time to think through, because students at the encampment also raised the question of abolition, right? How might our thinking about Palestine be informed by, enlightened by, a framework or commitment of thinking with abolition? Right. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to give you two questions because we don't have time. We got to get through this. So I want you to talk about abolition, but I also want you to talk about carcerality without arrests. And why? Because part of what this president is going to tout is that unlike Colombia, we ended the encampment and didn't arrest, right? And I think I want to make sure that people understand the many forms of carcerality that happen in our world, right? And on this campus. So how do we stretch our understanding of abolition to understand the many dimensions of carcerality, and how should that anchor, relate, and form our work around Palestine and the continuing struggle of students and faculty and allies and comrades and community members who are dedicated and committed to the liberation of the people of Palestine?
Well, I want to thank you for starting us where, I know, it's where we need to be, and I'm just trying to figure out how not to talk about this forever, because, to your first question, by the time I went to Palestine, which was not until 2011, although, I'd been involved in the movement for a long time, I went as an abolitionist, and so while there, had the opportunity to engage people through that lens. And I went with a group of women of color and indigenous feminists. And so obviously feminism was also part of our project. We weren't all abolitionists, but we were having conversations about that. Barbara Ransby, our organizer, fearless leader here, is right here. And one of the things that I remember is being at Nablus, at the university, and asking people to raise their hands if they had been or knew someone who had been in prison. Because I knew what the answer was going to look like. But, and of course, everyone raised their hand. Which means that in that context, everyone understood the use of the prison to be about repression and state power and authority and unfair expression of state power and authority. But the following questions were interesting, because then the question, well, what will happen if there's a free Palestine? Yeah. And the inevitable answer is, oh, well, we'll get our people out, and then, but not we'll get rid of the prisons. So that started like a richer conversation, right? And I have found engagement with Palestinians and the issue of Palestine to be a very rich place to really talk about this issue. Because when our artists came, for example, from the project to visit with us, we spent a lot of our time talking about these issues, right. But they're not really sure whether they want to build a state, what kind of state, is there a way to have a state that doesn't have, is it a non-state state, right? These are the things that are being tossed around. But I would also say on the other side of that, so that's one thing that's important. Aren't we all learning, doing the work in the encampments or living in encampments about carcerality? I mean, we have seen the campus police.
Yes.
So any of us who thought that we could separate out these issues are quickly learning that we can't.
Right.
So I'll lead to your question about the carcerality that's not just the police.
Yes. Or the prison.
Or the prison.
Right.
And I said police because, this is a little bit of a digression, but as someone who started with prison abolition, I find it somewhat different from police abolition. I'm not saying they're not connected, I'm not saying many of us aren't involved with it, but when you do prison abolitionist work, you tend to be working with people inside who you will not be able to visit if certain things happen. You have to work with the system in certain ways. So we have to have we have a complex relationship with power that we develop, and that also extends from a kind of love, where you have to engage with people as individuals also. And it's complicated. But when I started hearing more and working more around police abolition, it seemed more simple, more in your face. And I feel like the lessons that I had from doing prison work for so long were really important for the police abolition. So now I'll answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
What I was trying to show in the Edison film, what I'm trying to say about the way we consume media constantly is that carcerality is not over there. I can't say I have an identity as an abolitionist, and so now I am pure of carcerality. So, in our project, Visualizing Abolition, we have to go over everything. So providing food, we always have open dinners. Arts likes to be fancy, right? So you have a museum, you have fancy dinner. Yeah. Our dinners are open at tables, and we share meals with lots of people. Everything has to be re-examined and re-examined again, and so I was whatever. Anyway, my grammarian mother would hate me for saying that. But anyway, so I think that we do need to understand more, and I think visual culture is helpful in this.
Okay.
Understand the ways in which we have naturalized even the forms of relationship, right? So a lot of us say, abolition feminist folks sitting here, that we have to address harm and know that we also commit harm. And that's one of the most profound things I felt when I went into the Humans of Life Row exhibition is there's a statement on harm.
Yes.
At the beginning of the exhibition. And when I read it, I realized how much work went into that statement, right? How much you have to negotiate, what someone wants to say versus what someone else wants to say. How do you get to a common ground? That's abolition work. It is anti-carceral, but it is not always advertised as such. And so I think we have to be attentive to all the ways in which we are, through racial capitalism, through all the structures that we are connected to, including the university,
Right.
how we're invited
Yes.
into carcerality.
Okay, I'm looking because
Oh, are we really that late?
I only have 7 more questions and we only have 10 more minutes. So let's
All right.
transition. No. Let's transition a little into the work of art. When you were, I happened to be a part of the think tank yesterday when you were in conversation. I was on Zoom. And there is a way in which I think we think of what's the work of art in abolition. Well, we can write reports and we can show statistics, but art illustrates that, right? And you pushed back on that yesterday. You said, no. Art is about really the production of a knowledge around prison and the work of abolition. So I'm wondering if you can say a bit more about how you think about art as emancipatory, but what's the process that we're utilizing or you think should be utilized?
Professor Kathy Cohen of Political Science.
Yes, that's right.
I'm talking to you?
Yes.
I'm talking to you. Okay, seriously. So I think one of the problems, and we have done this in the abolitionist movement too, is using art as if, let's all think about the important things and decide everything, and then let's get some work and put it up. It might look kind of nice, but nobody cares a lot about it. I mean, the Humans of Life Row exhibition was an example of a completely different way of relating to art.
Yes.
But also, art itself is not, I compared it yesterday to the law. It's also, it can be used in various ways. So not all art is emancipatory.
Right.
So making art in certain conditions, allowing other people to access the power of the arts, developing vocabularies through the arts that don't start with statistics and then arrive at a way of illustrating them, actually fighting back against statistics, which is partly the enemy of abolition.
Wait, I'm sorry, did you say fight back against
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, I did. Professor Kathy Cohen of Political
You're pushing
Science.
a little too much here, but that's all right. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Well, if you think about how many years we've been studying prisons and everyone's come up with more numbers, more details, more things that prove it's wrong, and none of that has been persuasive. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's just because we can keep studying the problem, but we are also making an industry to study the problem, and we've had that industry ever since we've had prison.
Okay, so how does art interrupt that process? Because I could imagine another system of producing art
Absolutely.
that is not accessible largely, that is funded by donors and foundations, right? That also, so how do we interrupt the system production and make it truly transformative and revolutionary and radical?
Well, what I said was contextual. So I'm talking about the way we have related to sharing information about incarceration, the narratives we've used and depended on, and the modalities we've used to display what's wrong with incarceration at this moment, which does not mean what I'm saying right now will work in a future moment or would have worked in a past moment. But we've gotten to a point where we're saturated with information, especially of a certain kind, and it no longer has the capacity to frame. In fact, there's a research, which I don't have the footnote right now, that demonstrates that the more people actually study material that says that there's racial disparities in sentencing or whatever, the more they think black people are more violent.
Yeah.
So, okay, so how does art disrupt that?
How does art
So
interrupt that?
not all art would interrupt that, but doing art in a certain way, especially in the presence of that information, allowing art to disrupt how we display information, allowing artists to mess with, and I tried to show some of that, right? The way we receive that information, allowing moments of stillness, allowing expertise to wither away, allowing relationships to be built into the work. Those are the things that I think make a huge difference. Does that mean that that will then work and get us through? No, but it's an intervention at a particular moment when we have been saturated.
Okay. All right, now I have to figure out, of my 7 questions, what are the ones I do want to ask you? Let's stay there for a minute, because Benny, who is in our mixed enrollment class, and you know Benny, I know, you'll have a chance to talk, and we'll be at Stateville tomorrow. He said art is a kind of process to start and imagine a world without prisons and carcerality. He actually is arguing for art as the work of an emancipatory site. So I guess I want to just go back and say, again, how do we ensure that art, beyond artists, I guess I would say, still becomes an emancipatory possibility for people to think differently about carcerality and abolition. You know what I'm saying? So if we take it away from what artists produce, might it be a site for average folks to engage and reimagine? I'm putting artists, it's not average, right? But to engage and reimagine the possibility of life without carcerality. And does that mean that we think about curriculum in public schools? Does that, I mean, I'm just thinking of, like, where is that? How do we get there and do that?
Well, so I love what Benny said, and I want to respect that. I also know that art gets romanticized. I also know that there's a commercial art market, which has all of the, you know, racial capitalist forces attached to it, and isn't a space of liberation generally, which doesn't even mean, you know, it's not necessarily what the artist intends, but that can happen to the work. So what I'm saying is that it's more akin to what you said about education. We talk about education, not incarceration. And we're starting to talk more about what we mean by education. And I would say this is an example.
Okay.
You know, like when I was in school, Prop 13 passed in California in my 9th grade year. They removed most of the arts, 5 of the 7 languages, et cetera, right? You know what they kept. And this is what we've seen happen to our schools. It's happening to universities as well. It's not an accident. It's not just because they're saying that people don't make money, you don't make donors. There are other reasons why those are the targets. And so even if you're not an artist, the practice of making work, the practice of doing something with your hand, the practice of thinking about selection. In that conversation yesterday, some of the artists were talking about like how they chose the scale for their works, right? And what that, you know, the scale of this is between the toilet and the bed where I could work, and so my piece is this scale, and the scale of the child next to me who's anticipating going where I'm going, right? So these scales are being managed in that work, and doing that work and talking about that work. I'm not just saying like showing you a piece of work is going to change you.
No, right.
I'm saying working counter to the mainstream epistemological approaches for this time is important. And that means doing that work and reclaiming art for its emancipatory potential, but it's not guaranteed for.
Because I could think of it as, if you think of kind of public education, where are the moments where students are truly asked to imagine? It is not generally in the math class or the science class, right? And under the right conditions, that imagining could also take the form of reimagining one's relationship to power, to safety, right? That all of those things are possible. I'm not saying it only happens in the art class, but it might be the most generative site in a school day for students to be engaged in a process of reimagining.
But are students thinking of the art they're producing as just individual works of genius? Right? So, I mean, it depends. You know, this is like, you know, I mean, it's not like you have different teachers, right? You have a teacher who knows how to make art do that work, and you have a teacher who knows how to tell you to draw the same thing that everyone else has drawn and make it look like those things.
Right.
Draw those people, not the other people. Make work only about happy things. I mean, there's
Right.
all kinds of things that are messages that are not going to be emancipatory.
Well, when you said kind of singular, right, as someone who sadly thinks of themselves as a social scientist, right, I talk about carcerality, right, so, but I often think of the production of art as singular. And one of the things that you said again at the think tank yesterday was you said you saw the relationships in the art. Can you say a bit more about what you meant by that?
I mean, I'll just use the exhibition as an example since you're all going to go. So the statement of harm at the beginning, it's really important. Already I'm seeing relationships. Then there's this beautiful timeline which has these kind of color-coded and materially coded. So there's like some that are glass, some that are handwritten. So it's a timeline of our, local and collective history and personal histories, and they're all mixed together, but they're coded so that you can weave your way through. You see all those relationships, relationships to history, relationships to time, relationships to family, relationships to other artists. Then as you move through, you have women inside Logan who've written pieces, and the guys in Stateville have selected pieces to respond to make work. Relationship there. A relationship in intertextuality in the writing itself, where they're reading James Baldwin, they're reading other things. Those relationships are there. Relationships to history, relationships to unthinking racism, those relationships are there. So the layers of pedagogical practice and the layers of relationship building that are displayed in those works are not like all works.
Would you say that that's an abolitionist practice of art production?
I would like to
Or-
say that.
or a
I wouldn't hold it
feminist.
out. I wouldn't say it's only, but I think of this as very key to abolition feminism. I think of, I thought of that space. I felt it immediately, from the statement moving forward. I just felt that the collective, but without dismissing individuals. And so the title, right, Humans of Life Row, right? So the assertion of humanity, I still struggle with that, right? Of why we go around about that. That's a hard one. We could talk about that for a long time, but we won't. But I think that each artist was recognized, has a name attached, gets to talk about the work, gets to be proud of the work, but each of them, in speaking about the work, spoke about other relationships.
Totally, yeah. I want to not move us, but have you talk a bit about Abolition Feminism Now. That's the book, the amazing book that after you go see the exhibition, you're going to buy the book. There's a lot of directing of what you're going to do.
Very bossy.
But yes. But in that book, there is a deep tie for you and for your co-authors with abolition and feminism. So I'm wondering if you could say a bit about why. And I feel like I'm not sure we ever said what you mean or what many people mean by abolition. And so what do we mean by abolition, and how, in fact, might you make the argument that the preferred way to think about and to pursue an abolitionist vision strategy has to be rooted in feminism, maybe Black feminism?
Are you trying to be very social science? You're trying to make me prescriptive. I am not. I'm like the opposite of prescriptive. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try at least to answer your question.
All right, thanks.
Well, so first of all, I would say abolition feminism is a compound noun. It's not abolition plus feminism. That's actually very important. And I don't feel like telling the story in front of, but
But you do have that period there.
we do have periods
Abolition, feminism.
because the idea was that we would get people to read and think through why they thought they were so separate. So if you read the chapter on abolition, ooh, there's feminism in there. You read the chapter on feminism, so it's not as one might have expected prior to engaging the work, hopefully.
Yeah.
What is abolition feminism then? It's really, bottom line, a vision of freedom for all, but it is living in the multiple temporalities that allow us to acknowledge the harms in the present and attend to them, and at the same time to be living with each other as if we live in a different kind of world. And you described it when you described the encampment. You said it's a community, it existed, it was here, right? They can raise it, but we still know it was there. And while people were there, I know some things were not so pretty, because I've heard, right? So people don't always get along, things don't always work out, right? People don't always agree, but you're working with it in a different way. You're still living with each other, you're still communicating about it. So to me, yes, abolition, we're talking about prison abolition and police abolition, we definitely want to remove those systems.
Right.
But as you pointed out in the very beginning, carcerality lives in the university system, it lives in every part of us. So you can't just say we get rid of those things and they're separate.
Right.
That's why abolitionists talk about the footprint of the prison. So we have, the prison industrial complex, which includes everything around us. And if we just delete things, we don't transform them.
Right.
So abolition feminism is the transformation of those things, but also without violating abolitionist principles by assuming that there's some kind of trajectory toward which harm against women or gender nonconforming people can be is only matters to the extent that you get greater sentences for those harms. So that's carceral thinking.
Carceral feminism.
Within, right, we call it carceral feminism. Elizabeth Bernstein coined that term. So if that is the way of thinking about change, that is not consistent with abolition feminism. And we know there's for a while, although it doesn't feel like that so much today, most feminists were still talking about their safety. In these times, we're getting to see, and this is where the encampment can teach us again.
Exactly.
Right? What makes us feel safe?
Yes.
Does the UCPD showing up make anyone feel safe? How do they treat people's things? There's a way you could do things that would not be as harmful and violent. And that's not the way the police choose. It's never the way the police choose.
Right. Tracy, we have to stop. Can I do one quick follow-up? I know it won't be quick. Which is, I think, we talked about this, which is, it points us to this idea that, as you said, abolition, right, is complicated. It's a process. So if we think about encampment and what we saw, for example, at UCLA, where we saw the police step back so that, in fact, those in the encampment can be brutalized, right? Or how students here were struggling with, do you say no police? Because in fact, for example, black students at the encampment didn't feel safe, as we often don't, right, with the police. But we also know that counter-protesters will use the absence of what looks like a police force, right, to brutalize those, in fact, who are struggling for justice. And so how does one kind of practice and hold on to abolition, right, while also navigating the processes of keeping your people safe, right? Because in the end, people want to be safe, and they deserve to be safe. And we have to think, yes, long-term about alternative systems,
But we're not.
But we're not, yes. So.
We're not. Well, there's a lot of people writing and thinking about this and practicing this, and I think we can think of a lot of people, but Chicago again, Mariam Kaba. I mean, there's a lot of work now about how to think safety and produce safety in your own communities. And we're still not very sophisticated at it. So, I have definitely seen situations, especially around universities, where the police sometimes seem like, not now, they sometimes can seem slightly like not big deal. But when we find that they are used, we see the racial disparities in targeting. We see all of the same patterns that we've documented in every other police force. And they exchange technologies, and they exchange equipment, and they use the same things, and they use the same tactics. And so, we can't necessarily, we can't rely on that as safety. We can build different safety. I also want to say, and this is something that's really important to acknowledge, we're all taking risks. And I mean, I don't want anyone to be harmed, but we're doing this work and we're going to be harmed in some way. And so we need to distribute that risk. You know, when we think about, like, I don't like when people say that person wasn't at the protest. You know, people who are not citizens, people who, there's all kinds of reasons why people can't do certain things. I think a more abolitionist way of being is to acknowledge who can do what when, and to support all of us, and to have an infrastructure that's more powerful than the one that is fighting against us. Now, you know, can I today tell you all the steps to make that safety? No, it's very contextual, but there are groups that are training people in this. There is a lot of conversation. I mean, this was even in my college activism, I remember us being trained to do security. And so, you know, we have a long tradition of doing that. Some of that security training, though, was quasi-police, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, now we need to think more about, you know, how we communication, how we lock hands with each other, how we, those of us who are maybe taller or stronger or bigger, you know, operate with others.
Yeah.
Those are the other things we need to think. But I'm not going to finish that answer because it's a really long answer.
Yes.
But I'm saying it as, it's not something that we have to all think about. I mean, I'm thinking about Mimi Kim's work, and I'm thinking about you know, so much of the work on alternatives to incarceration, which come from collectives which have practiced this.
Right.
So those things are present for us.
Fantastic. All right. I think
We're in
Tracy
trouble?
is going to.
I just want to say thank you Gina, thank you Kathy, thank you all for being here. And before we go, I'm sorry we couldn't have time for the Q&A, but I did want to give one special person who's with us tonight a chance to make a comment. Jimmy Soto, who is the current justice practitioner at CSRPC. I just wanted him to take us home with a few closing remarks.
All right, thank you all. First of all, thank you, Gina, Kathy. Great. We could do this all night. I'm sure everybody shares that sentiment. We could listen to them all night. But I'll be brief. I just want to say that, as Gina was pointing out, it's all about changing minds. And I'm part of the think tank. I'm 42 years wrongfully convicted. I got out in December. And I think my exoneration is an act of abolitionism. I think that micro acts of abolition can be done through prison education, through those that are incarcerated doing artwork. And I encourage everybody, like Gina is saying, to come to the Humans of Life role, where we're trying to change narratives. We're trying to not take back our humanity, but to highlight our humanity, that they never took it. And I think those micro acts can grow into macro acts, and that we can evoke some change within the system. Because as she was saying, and I was thinking about it, that, you know, the Palestinians, the Free Gaza movement, that's an open air prison. And I have, you know, a lot of love for that, and I support it. And like she said, I wasn't able to go there physically on campus, but I did certainly voice it whatever I can. So it's like I said, it's these little micro acts that I think will change minds and grow. So I welcome everyone to come to that space. It's at 3219 South Morgan, more beautiful, more terrible, which is the theme of Humans of Life Row. So I don't want to prolong this. I want to thank you all for coming here. And again, I could listen to you all night, personally.